briefly introduce myself. So my name is Umut Erel. I'm a sociologist, and this session, it's really wonderful to give this session together with Elena Boukouvala, and you might notice some similarities. That's probably because we have been working together. Elena was our PhD student and now holds postdoctoral fellowship in geography. But Elena, you can talk a little more about this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to, so we're both aiming to have our presentations for about 20 minutes. And I was thinking that this is Friday morning after 3 very intense days of presentations. So I'm going to talk you through briefly the research that I've undertaken and then share a couple of short films that maybe give you more of a flavor of the research. So firstly, let me start by talking you through maybe my theoretical framework, and my research interest has been on migrant families and citizenship. We can see that migrant families are often marginalized in public and political debates. They are seen as at the either as outside or at the boundaries of the nation. And I've been interested for a while in how the migrant families themselves contest this marginalization. Migrant mothers, in particular, are often seen as embodying traditional culture, and by virtue of that, often seen as standing in the way of their children's integration. Sometimes they are even blamed for the supposed problems of migrant young people's integration. Um, yeah, so yeah, so that's where we're starting from. This is what but my approach and the approach of my research team has been to really put this stand it on its head, maybe, this approach, and to look at how migrant mothers are already uh, embodying and enacting citizenship through their own practices of constructing belonging and placemaking, both for themselves, their children, but also their wider communities, and to use this as a starting point to critique state and but also everyday cultures' exclusionary understandings of citizenship, and to see how we can theorize citizenship from the point of view of migrant mothers themselves and migrant families themselves. And the theoretical approach that I'm using is one that looks at citizenship as performative. So I'm drawing on theorists of inclusive citizenship like Ruth Lister, who sees citizenship as a more total relationship that is inflected by identity, social positioning, cultural assumptions, institutional practices, and a sense of belonging. And I'm also drawing on the concept of enacting citizenship that is really challenging the idea of citizenship as a privilege or citizenship simply as a status or habitus, and instead focuses our gaze on the performativities of citizenship. And here I'm drawing on Eysen's definition of acts of citizenship as acts that transform forms, orientations, strategies, technologies, and modes, that is, citizens, strangers, outsiders, aliens, of being political by bringing into being new actors through creating new sites and scales of struggle. And very briefly about the research project that I'm sharing with you, it's the Participatory Arts and Social Action Research Project, which was a methodological research project that I undertook with colleagues. Irene Kaptani was the research fellow, Meghe O'Neill at the time at University of York, now at Cork University, and Tracy Reynolds from Greenwich University. And the focus was on looking at how we can use participatory action research and arts-based methods to generate new knowledge and insights into social exclusion. And part of that was to reach broader audiences with research training, toolkit, and resources. And I can point you to the website later if you are interested. So the research combined walking methods and participatory theater, and we worked with three groups. One was migrant mothers, the other one was girls from migrant families, and the third one was migrant mothers with no recourse to public funds. And it was a broad research question to understand experiences and sense of belonging, placemaking, and how they're enacting citizenship. So I'm going to mention briefly the collaborations, which were really very important to the project in terms of both the arts-based methods, but also in terms of the action research element, let's say. So we worked with Counterpoints Arts, which is an organization that works mainly with migrant artists, with Runnymede Trust, which is a race equality organization, and two support organizations. Renaisi is a family support organization, and Praxis is a migrant advocacy organization. And with Marsha Chandra, who's the filmmaker who made the films that I'll share with you later. We looked particularly at participatory theater. I'm going to just briefly explain one key method that we use, that is forum theater, that draws on the work of Augusto Boal and the Theater of the Oppressed, which was developed in the 1970s or beginning in the 1970s, beginning in Latin America, but also taken later on in the 80s and 90s to Europe, where he was in exile. It was a method that, or forum theater is a method that asks participants to construct a dramatic scene where they can show a dilemma, a situation of oppression or a problem. And then it invites other participants onto the stage to take the place of the protagonist and to develop strategies for changing the course of action to achieve a particular outcome. So one example I'll give that came up again and again in our work was being at the GP practice and wanting to get an appointment and being sent away by the receptionist. So the protagonist tries to get the appointment. The others who are watching it think about other strategies that they might use for actually getting that appointment. Yeah. So in this forum theater, participants are not only actors or spectators, but they become what Boal termed spect actors. That is, they can act, but also reflect collectively on their actions, but also on the social structures that actually impact and limit and shape the possibilities for action. Yeah, this I'll this is one of the, I've got a couple of photos interspersed. The walking methods, on the other hand, so what we did with the theater methods is the idea was to bring in social life into the workshop space. And with the walking methods, what we did is to explore the themes that we had elaborated in the workshop space in the outside world. So arts-based walking methods are embodied, relational. It's about walking together, what Maggie O'Neill calls shoulder by shoulder, creating a different kind of conversation and creating different kinds of embodied stories. And one of the qualities that it really brings out is that of empathic witnessing. Yeah. So then we also reflected. So the walking methods consisted of one session where we asked our participants to draw a map from a place that mattered to them to to another place that mattered to them, and put in different places along the route. And this was a great opportunity to reflect around their sense of belonging, also unbelonging, places of safety, and feeling unsafe. And then the next session, we undertook walks together with our participants, where they guided us, that we recorded with with photography, but also when we had the opportunity, with films and audio recordings. And in the last part, we brought back all the materials that we created and reflected on that together again. Another part of the methods are more, so I'm going to show you briefly a film about the third group that we worked with, which is mothers and families affected by the no recourse to public funds policy. I'm not going to explain that in depth now because it's explained a bit in the film, but I'll share with you the idea of legislative theater, which was also developed by Augusto Boal, which is the idea that people who are affected by legislation, by policy, should be brought into the process of making policy, making legislation. So in his case, that was maybe more practicable than in our case. This is a method that he invented while he was a city councillor in Rio. In our case, we were quite aware of the limitations, because we obviously are neither part of government nor of policy decision-making structures. But however, we thought it would be still a useful thing to bring the experiences of those who were affected by this no recourse to public funds policy to a conversation around the policy and practice. One way in which we did that is we brought social workers into the workshops who engaged in the theater process. We also took our short theater scene to the House of Commons and to a policy day that we initiated with policymakers and practitioners. And we also published a briefing report on these methods. So now I just want to briefly share with you the film.
When I first came to the group, I had no idea what I was getting into. I thought it was just a group of women from different backgrounds just speaking about how they manage with everyday life in London with children, having no recourse to public funds.
I've been homeless for like 6 months. I've been sleeping in church with my little boy. Eventually, when I went to the social services, they gave us a room to stay. And my boy was like, I'm happy. I'm a king. This is my room. I can do whatever things I like in this room.
Mommy, why do we have to move all the time? I don't like it, mommy. And he keeps on. So he is very cranky all the time. Within 2 months, I've moved about five different times. So it's very, very challenging. The difficult ones was listening to how much pain, how much suffering that mothers have to go through having no recourse to public funds. It's not my identity. I'm not a migrant.
Last year, that's when they stopped me from working when the immigration people came to my house.
We have to build a wall around ourselves to protect ourselves, because if we don't, we just completely crumble and we take our family with us, especially our children. And I thought I was the only one going through it until I met these ladies and I felt, oh, at least somebody can identify.
We all know you with you.
Taking my daughter from school, from Finsbury Park, we have to take the bus to Hackney. It takes us like 30 minutes.
I liked it knowing that you could actually put a map out and map out our day-to-day activities, how we manage, to work around it, having limited funds.
Outside the train. Yeah. This is where we did this first birthday. I did it one day.
So taking Umut along with me, telling her about it, showing her, it made me really feel that I was accepted. And my husband was very impressed. He said, and she came to the door? I said, yes, she knocked at the door.
Do you want to take a photograph, for this place where you come with your daughter?
Each time I see them, I'm always like dodging them because I'm ashamed. I don't want them to see me. Ashamed.
And actually, have it done through drama. And that itself was exhilarating because I had never seen, your life story being acted out in that way.
Home office. God will punish them.
Human rights council.
We are classed as we shouldn't have any part of the welfare system, and that's what I felt is drastically wrong. When our parents and our ancestors, they were the ones who really worked hard in this country.
In the House of Commons, the room is very, very tiny. So, for a big performance in the movement, we cannot do that.
To change policies is a difficult thing, but at least we're working on it. There's a way to go to implement it. It may take a long time. It may be difficult, but at least we're doing something about it. And that was really, really, really good for me.
That's my number.
Raphael. No, stay in buggy. Stay. Ẹ ṣe dáadáa o. Sọ pé dàbọ̀ àjí ṣe bábà ti Bólú. Oh my God. I would like you to put us in your imagination and consider yourself to be us. Believe me, no one would wake up and plan this living condition for their life. Open wide, get your product, target and stack it high.
Good morning, team. Good morning. Good job.
Well, that has been my first performance being part of the research group. And I didn't think I had the ability to. It helped to boost your confidence and you were actually acting out what happened in your everyday life. I think it's better told through drama because you put everything into it. It's not just saying it, but actually showing it out, showing it in your body language, in your facial expression. As migrants, we still have the potential to be able to tell our story despite all the pain and the suffering, and we can tell it to them so that they can realize that we are still human beings and we've got children who need us and they need the help of the system in order to progress.
I've been through a lot in this country, and as God will have it, my papers came through. And I applied to Queen Mary University so that I can study my master's. But unfortunately, my transcript did not come on time from Nigeria, so my application was deferred to next year. So by God's grace, next year I will go and do my master's, and it's all good.
What we do in the group, we create a soup, but the ingredients is not the usual herbs or spices, it's what happened today.
Positive solution.
Positive solution.
Good letter from the Home Office.
Good letter from the Home Office. Change.
Happiness.
Happiness.
Observance.
Observance.
Success.
What?
Success.
Success. Success. From sources. Success. Great. Okay. Solidarity. Good news.
Human rights culture.
Human rights culture. Hope.
Building alliances.
Building alliances.
Nice accommodation.
Nice accommodation. Yeah, you know, more funding in the sewing pot.
Better social workers.
Another bit of things you want to get rid of.
Growing some righteous anger.
So just really to wrap up then, in which ways does this research constitute an act of citizenship is one of the questions that we asked ourselves. And one thing that we realized is how participatory arts can change relationships between researchers and participants in a more equitable way. It can also allow for new forms of subjugated knowledges to emerge within the workshop spaces. And this is really important for the research participants themselves in terms of validating their own knowledges and sharing them with each other, because one of the consequences of, let's say, this policy, if we're focusing on this third group, is to enhance social isolation and to continue a discourse that is very much a victim-blaming discourse. So these methods allow to develop new knowledges together with researchers to contest these discourses. And it's also a way of developing research as a shared act of challenging both the existing ways of knowing, but also the social injustices which are constituted by these ways of knowing, as well as constituting these ways of knowing. And at the bottom, you can see the address of the website if you would like to see more of the resources that we produced as well. Thank you so much. Yeah, Elena, your turn. You're muted. Okay, you're unmuted.
Yes, I'm
perfect.
Thank you, Umut. I'm always so inspired by your work. As Umut said before, Herel and Marie Gillespie were my supervisors for my PhD, which was in the discipline of sociology. And I'm currently doing an ESRC postdoctorate in the geography department with my mentor being Steve Pyle. And I will share with you the project that emerged out of this work. I'll just share my PowerPoint.
We can see it well.
Can you see it? Perfect. Thank
you.
Yeah. So the name of my project is Arts into Acts. And what I'm currently looking at is how we can create stages with young people with experiences of migration and publics in response to the refugee crisis, and how through creative methods, affects and politics of the audiences can be mobilized. This is my PhD research. It looked at creating stages with refugee and local young people in Lesbos through creative and digital methods, and particularly how young people experience and negotiate borders, belongings, and how they create acts of citizenship, often through arts themselves. So it included interviews, participatory observation, a creative digital group, which happened online actually because of COVID. It was not initially part of the research plan. And then through this online aspect, it could follow young people towards their onward migration. This project started in 2021, and I'm still collaborating with the same young people for how the project developed. We also created public events, and the final event of my PhD work was a digital performance, which was attended by many people from around the world, and there the artists shared their work, the creative work, and they interpreted anonymized material from the interviews. The methods that were used were participatory action research, and in particular drama therapy, performance activism, and the project crossed the different disciplines of sociology, psychology, drama therapy, and human geography. I will share a little bit about the context of Lesbos, which was the central point of my field work and where I continue to go back to during the years. So the project started, as I said before, in 2021, the field work, and it was actually just after the COVID measures have been uplifted in Greece and we could move from area to area. At that point, Moria camp, which some of you might have heard, it's quite popular in Europe, and it was heavily militarized. And the residents could get out only for 3 hours per week. And this, of course, escalated the already existing repressive practices in the islands. There were scarce resources, different mental health difficulties, and the young people themselves created initiatives, grassroots initiatives to respond to this isolation and precarity and to create new spaces of belonging. So this is what my work really focused on exploring with them. One of these initiatives was Boat Theatre, which was created from the residents of the camp, and through this theatre they shared their experience of the pushbacks. And another was the Rad Music International, which connected people in the camp through music and dance. The responses from the locals varied. In 2016, as some of you might know, the residents of Lesbos were nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for their solidarity responses. 4 years later, in 2020, there were nationalistic extremist movements and attacks by the riot police. There were still solidarity efforts, but much less than in 2016. And these extremes, I think, were what has been most documented in terms of local responses. My research also explored much more complex positionings of locals and how those were formed. The key theoretical concepts are related to performative citizenship and citizenship acts. As Umut said before, I was also inspired by her theoretical framework. So citizenship acts as acts that transform modes of being political by bringing into sight new actors. I looked at borders. This came completely from the field work. It was not part of my original research planning, but there were so many bordery practices that it took me 4 months to be able to start actually to get in touch with participants. So Yuval Davis speaks about the border as a firewall, making those that do not belong invisible. And then the focus of my research was to go closer into these spaces that might remain invisible of ordinary interactions between the young people themselves, between them and their families and their communities, and to look at how these ordinary aspects of life can bring into sight unheard and unseen sides. The creative group that we made, and it followed people in their onward migration. Here is a photo of the group, and here is a collage that we made with documenting people's belongings. I asked them what was belonging for them, and they sent the photos on the chat, and we created this collage. Gradually, through the activity of the group, we made stages from the private space to the more public space. So, for instance, a poetry about the moon was shared as part of the group, and then people sent to each other photos of the moon as they were seeing them in their own places. At that point, they were all across Europe. And out of this, the group supported one of the artists of the group to make an exhibition in collaboration with Aristotle University. This activity of the group of transitioning from the private to more public spaces really inspired the activity of my fellowship, which was focused more on audiences. And my focus has been how to create impact and value through public events and publications. So collaboratively with my interlocutors that became at that point invited artists, we did together presentations in universities, conference presentations, publications, and a website. The act that I'm going to focus more now is a public performance that we created in March in Lesbos. And for that, we went back to Lesbos and we worked together with artists who live in Moria camp now. And we produced this performance that I will share with you. This video is only a glimpse of the process. We are still working on the final video, but I wanted to share it with you as it is emerging. Could I just check if you hear sound when I put it?
Yeah, I'll let you know. We can hear it.
Perfect.
Thank you.
This was a performance that we created in Lesbos. It was supposed to come to UK in June as part of the Refugee Week, but all of the visas of the artists were rejected. And what we are creating now is an online performance to find another way to invite our audiences, the audience that we wanted to invite in UK. So, which brings me, I think, quite timely to the value of the artistic initiatives that were created. I will start sharing my reflections about the value of the artistic initiatives, and then I will move on to the value of the creative methods, arts-based methods, and also limitations that I discovered during the work. The young people that took part in the project, both through the interviews and later on as invited artists, managed to create new spaces of belonging through their creative and political acts. All of the performances that you saw started in Moria camp. The photography, the songs, the theater, which you just briefly saw. And for some of the artists, at the point that they started creating, they were rejected asylum seekers. So these artistic spaces were often the only means that they had for political participation. Through these initiatives, new stages were created for refugees and locals to meet, and often those became the ground of new citizenship acts, utilizing resources that were physical, emotional, and legal. For instance, the dance and the music initiative that I mentioned earlier was created when the founder was a rejected asylum seeker. So he lived in this very paradoxical position to not have asylum himself, but to be leading an organization, a cultural hub that was legally certified through the support of the locals. The personal encounters through art challenge stereotypical representations that, as I said in the beginning of the my presentation were very much alive in Lesbos. And equally the lack of personal encounters reinforced stereotypes. The value of art-based methods during the research and the public engagement events. As I said in the beginning of my presentation, the research design and the use of creative methods contested borders. I managed to access people in the camp through these online creative sessions after 4 months of trying to make it possible and to maintain continuity with the online group as people traveled onward to their destinations. Initially, I was bringing more the methods through my drama therapy background and performance activist background, but then the sessions opened much more to what the young people wanted to share, their own arts and their own lived experiences. Changing country, trying to cross borders, trying to find a job, creating a new family. All this became the topic of our group meetings. As they met in the artistic space, people did not initially know about each other, about their backgrounds, if they were refugees or locals. So the relationships were, of course, shaped by their positionings, but they were not predetermined by them. They met initially in the play space, and then as the group was evolving, some people could move, others could not. They started to get to know about the lived experiences. One of our participants said, I learned about citizenship through the experiences of a person instead of the titles of the newspaper. This makes me care. And I think this was another important aspect, the ethics of care that were part of the process. The new representations of migration experiences were created that ruptured stereotypical state and media discourses, and the already existing artistic initiatives were amplified. I found that creative methods help to tune into the imaginaries of the young people and to create reciprocity in the research process and also collective acts of dissemination. New emotions were mobilized and new relationships that were formed that temporarily broke the isolation. What we discovered after our event in Lesbos is that new friendships were created among the residents of the Moria camp and people in Mytilene that continued after the performance ended. Power dynamics were changed in the classrooms, in our presentations in universities, and lived experiences were honored by both the artist and the audience. And research was mobilized also as an act of resistance, where the new steps of the research design are co-created with the interlocutors facing borders, like the visa rejections that we recently had for UK. Some of complexities. One of my key tensions when I entered the field in Lesbos, I was already working there for 3 years before in different camps in Greece, so I had an awareness of the context, and I often question creative methods as being more elitistic. I was thinking how people that do not have basic needs met might want to be part of a creative project. And this indeed was an important part of it, to really understand how people want to be involved and to create through the research process this level of choice. At the same time, many of the people that I met, many of the research participants used art as a survival strategy exactly when they did not have their basic needs met. So this tension between pragmatic and poetic aspects of life was an umbrella throughout the project as it developed. And what was really important was the collaboration with local organizations to be able to refer people that were struggling with other needs that we could not meet in the project. Another important part was to refrain from romanticizing acts, and I tried to interrogate that through an ethnographic framework of analysis, continue to go back to the spaces people lived and the new spaces they created. There were people who did not like arts, and in those cases we used different methods like interviews, participatory observation, different kinds of arts, but also the focus was continuously on the creative process rather than a product. Art was engaged as a creative expression more than a specific skill that someone has with an artistic background. An important consideration was the possibility of art to gloss over privilege and conflict, to create a sense of intimacy that might not give always the depth of experience that people can exchange, that they have different positionalities. So what we discovered was important was to have these difficult conversations in the group. We discovered that the trust among us was changing throughout the years. We are now working for 4 years together. And I also saw how my own assumptions was challenged through the process. I was trying to interrogate a field that I was part of. So as the research was deepening, I became much more aware of my own assumptions and the categories that I have in my language and how this affects the research process. And another aspect was the policy perspective that this research did not address until now. This is perhaps a growing edge, that young people are speaking through their art, but who is listening? I will close my presentation with some final thoughts on the ethics. As I said before, ethics of care were pivotal. Ethics of care as a species of activity that includes everything that we do to maintain, contain, and repair our world. And the discoveries that I made during the project was how important is the politics of the ethics of care, as they can be mobilized by everyone that has this intention to maintain, contain, and repair the world. The fragile context, the over-researched field of Lesbos, and the importance of local collaborations, the importance of attending to power dynamics, diverse legal statuses, and access to resources. I mentioned in the beginning that the research used the psychology discipline. My background is in psychology, and part of what I used was trauma-informed methods, but then that was really in tension with my own Western psychological education, and I found that through the arts-based methods, I could tune much more into the imaginaries of young people. And the tension between extractive research and reciprocity. We try to continually question which is the value of the research for the participants and how their own rights claims could be amplified. Thank you. That was it.